as Nathan. We learned about Nathan. He's a prophet. He's a friend of David. And the Lord sends him to David. He starts off with this parable, and the parable is just a fancy word for a story to make a point. He tells him about this rich man and this poor man. And the rich man obviously has a lot of cattle, he has a lot of sheep. And the poor man just simply has one tiny little lamb that he loves. And customary will show us that in that time when you have a traveler or a guest come to your house, you would slaughter your cattle and slaughter a sheep and prepare a meal for them as a sign of respect, as a sign of hospitality even. And when the rich man had a traveler stop by, he decides he's not going to use one of his own, but in fact he's going to take from the poor man's one tiny little lamb. And he slaughters it, prepares a meal for the man. Now Nathan is hoping that David would catch the connection between himself and the rich man in the story. And so he's telling the story, kind of hinting and hoping that David would just kind of put the pieces together. But as we read in verses 5 and 6, he doesn't. David is outraged. It says, he burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, this man deserves to die. And David is just oblivious. He's not getting it. He's not understanding what this actually story means to him. And Nathan just gets fed up at this point. He's telling the story, and David's just blind. And finally gets to this point of even frustration with David. And he says, you are the man. You're the man, David. You. And I can't imagine the frustration in Nathan at this point. But in verses 7 through 9, he goes on to say, as we read, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And if this had been too little, I still would have even given you more, David. But why do you despise the word of the Lord? By doing what is evil in his eyes. You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. You see, from this time where David sees Bathsheba on the roof, and he lusts after her, from that day to this day where we find Nathan rebuking David, it was about 9 to 10 months, probably a little bit over 10 months. The child was just born. And in that time frame, David was doing his absolute best, everything in his power, to cover up that one mistake of lusting after another man's wife. We see him immediately try and manipulate a situation where Uriah would sleep with his wife that night. He would come back from war, sleep with his wife, and then everything is okay. It just seems like Uriah got her pregnant. But when that doesn't work, he goes even further lengths to cover up. And he sends Uriah to war. So Uriah is on the front lines, and his army backs up, and he dies by the sword of the Ammonites. And David sent him knowing that he'll be killed, knowing that he would be dead at the end of that. So for over 10 months, David lives as a liar, as a thief, as a murderer, and as an adulterer. He does all this in secret, just so that the masses wouldn't know that their righteous king had messed up. Just so they wouldn't see him make mistakes. And finally, God, in that passage, brings everything to light. He's tired of it. He's tired of the hiding. He's tired of the covering. He just brings it all to light. Now, unfortunately, I relate a lot with David in this passage. I wish I didn't. I wish I related with Nathan. He's sweet. But I don't. I was 17 years old at a point in my life. Crazy. And I just got a new job. I was working at Coffee Bean. And I just got a new car because I just got my license. It was this really cool Cholo truck. It's like crazy wide, it's old and lowered, tinted windows. It was the worst purchase of my life. But either way, I was still driving. I called it Cholola, by the way. It's a name. It was a cool car. I was living with a really close friend of mine, Matt Berg. Some of you may know him. I would actually consider him a brother of mine, and I was living with him at the time and just moved in. I was leading worship at the middle school, and I was leading at the middle school and mentoring middle schoolers and hanging out with them and being a part of that. I actually just entered into a new relationship as well. 17 years old, first girlfriend, pumped. Well, after 4 months of being in that relationship, I realized that my feelings for this girl just grew. And I actually just loved her. I realized that, and I was in love, and I had butterflies in the stomach, and it was dandy. As that relationship progressed, though, we started becoming more physical with each other. Well, 6 months into the relationship, her and I made the very quick decision to sleep together. And so we did. And I remember that night driving home. Got to my house, got to my bed, laid down, stared at this white ceiling,